Over the last decade, extremist groups like ISIS have left a trail of devastation across Syria and Iraq. Among their most documented actions was the mass capture of minority populations, specifically Arab Christian and Yazidi women. These women were torn from their families, loaded onto transports, and systematically traded in modern-day slave markets. The response from the global community was swift condemnation. For ordinary Muslims, this manifested in protests and public statements, arguing that these atrocities were complete aberrations, actions that violate core Islamic teachings. But the extremists carrying out these acts make a very different claim. They argue they aren't inventing these practices at all. They insist they are following a strict reading of established historical and religious precedents. To figure out how two groups read the exact same religion so differently, we have to bypass modern interpretations entirely. We need to look at the exact 7th century texts and military events these extremist factions cite to justify their actions. The justification starts with foundational texts, specifically Surah Al-Mu'minun, verses 5 and 6, and Surah Al-Ma'arij, verses 29 and 30. In both passages, the text makes a clear distinction regarding legal sexual activity. It separates access to married spouses from access to another specific group. That second group is described with the legal phrase, what their right hands possess. In the context of early Islamic law, this classification refers directly to enslaved females or captives of war. As this chart shows, early religious law was split into two pillars, spouses on one side and property on the other. Both converge under the overarching rule of lawful sexual access, creating a framework where activity with captives was permissible without a marriage contract. But religious law is rarely tested in the abstract. This framework collided with reality during a specific military campaign. Muhammad ordered his army to attack a pagan Arab tribe known as Banu Autas. The Muslim cavalry rode in, quickly routed the defenders, killed the fighting men, and captured the women of the tribe as prisoners of war. With the battle won, the victorious soldiers expected to divide up the spoils, which included the female captives. But they hesitated, facing an immediate ethical and legal roadblock. Many of these captive women were already legally married. In fact, their husbands had also been taken prisoner and were sitting right there in the very same camp. The soldiers wanted to claim their spoils of war, but engaging with a legally married woman was recognized as a serious transgression. They needed a definitive ruling on which claim was stronger, the existing marriage bond or the rights of the conquerors. They took the question directly to the Prophet. The answer to the soldiers' question arrived as a formal theological ruling, recorded in the Quran as Surah An-Nisaa, verse 24. Look at this flowchart. The text prohibits access to married women, with one exception, captives. Capture automatically nullifies previous marriages. By voiding those bonds, the women were legally transformed into property. For the soldiers, the legal barrier was gone. The ruling handed down at Banu Autas permanently codified the legal mechanism. A captive's previous bonds are instantly dissolved, granting the captor legal clearance. This brings us back from 7th century Arabia to the modern crises we see today. When ISIS captured Yazidi and Christian women, they weren't operating in a theological vacuum. They were executing an exact, intentional application of Surah An-Nisaa, verse 24, mirroring the precedent set at Banu Autas. So why do so many ordinary believers deny this connection? Often it comes down to historical literacy. The specific context behind the verses and the granular military history of the Prophet's biography are simply not widely read or taught in everyday congregations. There is an understandable desire to focus on the spiritual, peaceful elements of a faith. But that modern curation bypasses the historical reality of how the Prophet acted during a war and the explicit laws he left behind for dealing with conquered people. Ignoring or sanitizing historical texts doesn't erase them. It just leaves those same documents quietly waiting in the background, fully intact and available to be utilized by anyone willing to apply the words exactly as they were written.